Expired. And I give the call to member for Bruce.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I've got a few things I want to talk about, but let me just respond briefly to the previous speech. It kind of sums up this government, really. It's a random grab bag of platitudes and spin, no vision, no strategy and no point to it, a bit like that member. You know, they read in the newspaper that the only reason he's here is because he stacked a bunch of branches in the Liberal Party for Senator Michaelia Cash, and this is his little reward to hang out in federal parliament. Unbelievably, the first thing he talked about that concerned the residents of his electorate were their asset values and their investment outlook. Well, let me tell you what concerns the people in my electorate about your government's budget. They are terrified about what's coming down the pipeline in this budget. The cuts to wages, the cuts to JobKeeper in March, the cuts to Newstart or JobSeeker or whatever platitude and spin you want to call it, $40 a day. The budget that you're speaking in support of is going to push millions of Australians back into abject poverty to live on $40 a day, and you think that's a good thing. The attacks on superannuation, the refusal to guarantee their superannuation entitlements. You've effectively privatised half the stimulus by getting the most vulnerable people in this country to clear out every last dollar of their retirement savings just to survive, because you didn't act fast enough or do enough. Your industrial relations agenda to cut penalty rates.
I just remind you to direct the comments through the chair.
The government's industrial relations agenda to cut penalty rates for the most vulnerable workers. That's a good thing, is it? And it's all very well to talk about the incentives for young people. We support those. But what about everyone looking for a job who's over 35 years of age? They get nothing. They've been forgotten. Or casualisation. I heard the member opposite talk about, well, people just need to take a bit of temporary work if they can find it. Well, yes, true. Any work is good work. But this budget bakes in your agenda of privatisation of public services. Only yesterday in Victoria, only yesterday, in the middle of a pandemic with unprecedented demand for Centrelink services, the government cut 420 jobs, 420 call centre jobs from Centrelink, half of them in my electorate. And you know what those people are getting? Do you know what those people are getting from the government, Deputy Speaker? They're getting nothing, no redundancy, no payout, because they're just casual labour hire workers. Because the government has privatised the public service, and this government bakes in that privatisation. In every agency, tens of thousands of casual labour hire workers. This is the world that the government wants to return to and accelerate and run towards in this so-called snapback recovery. People in my electorate are worried about the fact that they can't get food. It's all very well for the government to tell us, oh, we put $200 million into emergency relief. Well, that's not landing in the disadvantaged suburbs. There's nothing in this budget that fixes that problem. The government's saying to people in a pandemic they should get on the bus and leave a suburb where they can't get food and catch a bus to where those big four charities that they've loved to hand the money out through happen to have offices. They're not prepared to reverse the cuts that Prime Minister Abbott put in place from the small local benevolent societies, from the neighbourhood learning centres, from the local charities who get nothing from the federal government. They say, oh, we put $200 million into four big charities that don't actually service people properly in my electorate, but the member opposite is worried about asset values and investment outlooks. So Member for Werriwa and I was saying, listening to that drivel, the people in our electorates are worried about having to sell their house at the bottom of the market when the mortgage relief suspension runs out soon, just at the very time the government is pushing people into poverty by cutting unemployment benefits and cutting JobKeeper. Unbelievable. Of course, it's another bill, we'll talk about that later, making it harder to get an education. I really hope that the Australian Electoral Commission roll you at the next election, Member for Moore, and if they don't, that your party rolls you and replaces you with someone who makes some kind of contribution to this place, apart from reading out those drivelous platitudes that whoever sends you in here with gives you to read out. It's just pathetic. This budget is a lost opportunity. The big lie, of course, is that somehow the economy was strong before this crisis. The economy was weak and tanking before this crisis. Underemployment was at record levels, over 1 million Australians not able to get enough hours of work to survive. Business investment was at historic lows, at the lowest since the government got elected. There's no business confidence, they weren't investing. Productivity growth was anaemic at best. And the government has now managed, unbelievably, to rack up a budget that's hurtling towards $1 trillion of debt at the end of these 4 years, on the path over the next decade to $1.7 trillion of debt, the highest budget deficit ever, the highest in a percentage terms of GDP since World War II, with no real plan for jobs and no real reform. That's the thing that really gets you at the heart of this budget. I get the tax cuts. I get them. I mean, it's nonsense to say that they're fully funded. They're borrowed. They're on the credit card for the next generation. Just another instalment of 40 years of failed trickle-down economic theory that if somehow we give money to the people over here and give money to businesses, a bit might trickle down to the rest of us. It doesn't work like that. It's failed. The government is running up a record budget deficit, a lifetime of debt with nothing to show and no real reform. No plan for energy to modernise our energy grid, the real reason that power prices are so high. No plan for childcare to support women's participation and back in the workforce. No plan for education except to make it harder to go to university. Harder to go to university. As Jackie Lambie said, I agree with her on this, Senator Lambie, it makes it harder for poor kids like people from my electorate and Tasmania, northern Tasmania, and your electorate, not your electorate over there, but from northern Tasmania. The member opposite should be ashamed of voting for that legislation to make it harder for people from her electorate to get a tertiary education, should be ashamed.